National High School Journalism Convention. Now I'd like to introduce our trio of speakers for this evening. In 2013, the Gazette of Colorado Springs published an investigation showing an increasing number of soldiers, including wounded combat veterans, were being kicked out of the service for misconduct, often with no benefits, as the Army downsized after a decade of war. The series, Other Than Honorable, was beautifully told in print and online with stunning photography, gripping narratives, insightful graphics, and compelling video. The series was named the National High School Journalism Convention's One Story for this convention, and the Gazette has actually been kind enough to provide materials for the series for classroom use. More about One Story, including examples and lesson plans for teachers, can be found at denver.journalismconvention.org. Tonight, we have the team behind the story. Joanna Bean has been with the Gazette for 25 years, working as business reporter, deputy features editor, local news editor, and most recently, managing editor. Michael Ciaglo, a staff photographer with the Gazette, has been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, and CNN. He has won multiple awards from the National Press Photographers Association, including being named NPPA 2013 Region 9 Photographer of the Year. And Dave Phillips worked with the Gazette from 2002 until 2014, when he became a national correspondent for the New York Times. The team's work on Other Than Honorable series earned the Gazette the 2014 Pulitzer Prize in National Reporting. Please give a warm welcome to the team behind Other Than Honorable.
Hello? Wow. Hello, future journalists. Welcome to Colorado, and what a thrill to be up here. A room full of future journalists. I'm almost speechless. This is so exciting. I'm going to introduce my two wonderful colleagues in a minute, but I want to first say just a couple really quick things. We're going to have the opportunity to talk to you about the story that we worked on and that really began in late 2012 and was published in 2014 and recognized by the Pulitzers in 2014. But I hope you enjoy that. But if nothing else, what I want to say to you tonight is that I was you 30 years ago. I didn't get to go to a national convention, but I grew up in Colorado. I did high school newspaper. I went on and was involved in my college newspaper and got a journalism degree. And you can be sitting here in 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years too. And the things that got me excited about journalism that long ago, that we truly are the daily miracle, that we're the first draft of history, that we are guardians of the First Amendment, are as true today as they were when they got me excited that many years ago. So I've never heard the First Amendment rendered in soul and funk, and that was a thrill too. So I hope that you walk away with that feeling, if nothing else, and I'm happy to stick around afterward and talk about journalism, as I think Dave and Michael are too. So I'm going to introduce Michael Ciaglo. He's a photographer at the Gazette, and he's going to talk to you about the photo part of this and tell you more about himself. And Dave Phillips, who, as you heard in the intro, is now with the New York Times, and it's very exciting, but we miss him at the Gazette too.
So what I wanted to do, which I guess has already been done a little, but I'll do it a little anyway, is just give you just a quick once-over of what we wrote about. In a nutshell, after the longest period of war in our country's history, we figured out that the Army was firing more and more soldiers every year. We graphed it and it went do, 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 do. And what was interesting about that is that when you fire a soldier, as punishment for firing them, you take away their VA benefits, their health care, all the things that as a society we give to our warfighters to try and help them back on their feet. And what we found out is that the people who were most likely to be fired were the people who brought home the invisible injuries of war. Post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, things that made it hard to function as a soldier, and so they would forget things, or they would mouth off to a superior, or they would not show up. And so they'd be sort of thrown out the back door. So in a nutshell, we discovered that the people that needed help the most, the ones who needed those VA benefits, weren't getting them. And what we then did when we realized that this wasn't just something that was happening in Colorado Springs, which is a place full of soldiers who went back multiple times to Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't just happening to them, but it was happening all over the country and had sort of flown below the radar. We knew it was a big deal and a place where if we could focus very narrowly on what the problems were that were creating this, we could change it. And that's what we did. We did a 3-day series, which I hope will pop up on the screen sometime soon. Hey! And we changed law in Washington, and we made a lot of people's lives better, people that we will never meet, which is as cool a feeling to me, equally as cool as hearing the First Amendment sung like that, which I just loved. Thank you very much for that. So I want you to know there seems to be this huge gulf between like you guys in high school and Dave Phillips, Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times correspondent. I was in high school, like didn't like classes, I was mouthy, like I just was like so cynical, I didn't believe in anything, and like I didn't realize this, but it was totally setting me up to be like a pretty like decent journalist. I never took any journalism classes in high school or college, and then it was later when I realized that what I really had wanted to do, what I was going towards my whole life was writing. You know, here was a place where at my hometown paper they were willing to let me in and let me write and pay me a little bit for it, which was super cool. And I think that most of my journalism training actually, Joanna's gonna cringe as I say this, like came on the job. Thanks largely to her, you know. So I say that both to let you realize that even people that are really successful are very human and maybe especially human, but also because when you talk about journalism and when you think about journalism and when you go to journalism classes, please remember this. That's what's going to make you a great journalist is yes, that skill, which you will have to work to learn, but also developing your humanity, reading the great books, looking at and learning about the great art, studying history, studying comic books, studying whatever you want that you love, that is passionate, that makes us humans. Because all of that stuff that is not journalism at all is going to come into your journalism. And it's really important because you will be the ones who ultimately, in small ways, pass judgment on the first draft of history. And so you need to bring all that with you. So no one's ever going to tell you that when they're like, you will sit through in your life, if you stick with this, you will sit through endless discussions and panels on what's wrong with journalism and what can we do better with journalism. And no one's ever going to talk about that, but it's so important. So I'll stop there and introduce my great friend and colleague, Michael.
Well, hi, guys. Yeah, this was, unlike Dave and Joanna, who are both super ancient and really old, I was in your shoes like 5 years before. I'm sorry, not that ancient. Wise. There you go. Wise. Very noble and wise. But I was in your shoes. I was in high school 5 years before I started working with Dave and Joanna on this project. I went to school to be a doctor, and that didn't work out after my first 2 years, and so I went into journalism. But, you know, like Dave said, it seems like this really big gap from where you're sitting now, but it's really not. With, you know, that motivation and that drive to get where you want to be, you can find that. And so what I kind of want to talk about, I got to jump a lot of slides ahead here. That's okay. Yeah, we can get back to those. But is just kind of, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of my days on the job working for this project. And I feel like this kind of embodies the whole thing and really what I went through during this project, which was that you really have to be thinking on your feet. You really have to be ready for anything. And if you can embody that and really find that in yourself to do, you can be anything you want to be. And so this was a day, this was back with one of our first soldiers. This was a guy named Cash Alvaro who he suffered seizures. He was a combat veteran with PTSD and TBI, and after he got kicked out of the Army for some minor misconduct, he landed basically homeless without anywhere to go, and had very serious problems. And so this is one of the first days that I really followed him around, and it was really just going to be a normal day. We were going to go to the doctor's office. He was going to try and get a prescription. And so you can see these are some of the first photos I shot before things started going south. But you know what, in those photos that I really skipped through really fast, and if you guys looked at the story and you saw all the pictures in there, what you guys are seeing is a very finished and polished product. It looks like it was really easy. It looks like it was nice and put together, and like that's how it was supposed to go. This is the story they wanted to tell, and so they found the pictures that they wanted to show, and then they took those pictures, and then it went into the final product. But that's really not how it works. And I kind of wanted to show you the process as I go through a day, maybe to show you how you really have to fight for your story. So I'm just going to go through quickly. This is before we went to the doctor's office. And as soon as we got to the doctor's office, it's a little tiny, but up in the top left corner, Cash started to collapse. And so this went from being just an easy doctor's visit where we were going to go and try and get some prescriptions to him collapsing, him being wheeled back into the back of the room in a wheelchair, him being put on a bed, the emergency EMTs being called, him being put on a stretcher, taken to the hospital, taken to the ER. And all of this happened super quickly. And each time that something else happened, each time that they wheeled him back, doctors told me that I couldn't be back there. When they were taking him out to the ambulance, doctors or the EMTs told me I couldn't go with him in the ambulance. When I arrived at the hospital, doctors there told me I couldn't be in the hospital. But each step of the way, I fought for the story. I knew what I needed to get. I knew that this was the story that we were trying to tell, that these guys are struggling and that they need help. And if I had let that slip with each chance that they gave me to kind of back off and take a step back and say, okay, yeah, I can't take pictures here, I'll go away, then we would have ended up with half of the story that we ended up with for Cash. A lot of these pictures that you're seeing here ended up all throughout his story. And so I kind of just wanted to touch on the fact that through all this, I guess, adversity coming towards me, this photo down here in the right corner, one of hundreds I made that day, was a photo that really went on to kind of symbolize this project. You can see here a much wider view of what I shot that day, tons and tons of pictures. And we narrowed it down, and we really felt that this picture showed him being kind of left behind, him being in this situation where he's alone, he's dealing with a lot. And so this is the picture that ended up being the front of our website. They ended up using it when they announced that we won the Pulitzer, and it ended up on the front page as the only picture, 6 columns wide, huge, to get people into the first story. And I'm going to pass it off to Dave now, and he's going to talk a little bit about how the beginning of that story kind of married with this picture and really kicked off the whole series.
Yeah, this is a good one because it kind of shows how messy this whole process was. So I found out about this general situation in December of 2013 and 2012. And we took these photos, when do you think, about in January? In December. But I wasn't there that day. I think I probably had another assignment. because amongst the things that you have to do on a newspaper, yes, you get to do your long projects, but you also have to do daily stuff. But I did go on another time when Cash went to the hospital, and I was there with him. And it struck me that I got there, and this guy was all by himself. Like, there was no one there to see him. And he was so totally alone, and yet also so totally, like, dependent on civilian society, because we ultimately pay the bill for this. The government, or the federal government, the VA and the Pentagon had left this in our lap. This guy, sitting in the hospital, crying after his combat. And so I thought, well, that really shows this whole thing, right? They don't deal with it. He's injured. Now we deal with it. And so I knew I wanted to start with that. And I knew that Michael had a photo showing exactly that. It just wasn't the same day. So the reader doesn't really know that. We did a sleight of hand. I'm not gonna sing this, but I will read it for you. This is the first time I've ever read this to myself, so this will be interesting. When I was writing it, here's how you know something's good. When I was writing this story, there were times when I would get choked up. Anyway, Cash Alvaro stared at the ceiling of an emergency room in January, listening to the beep of an EKG monitor for what he guessed was the 80th time in 12 months. The once healthy Afghanistan war veteran had collapsed in a hallway that night, then awakened confused in an ambulance and lurched up in alarm, swinging and yelling until the paramedics held him down and injected sedatives. Now he lay alone in a room at Memorial Hospital, quietly weeping. So we wanted to bring you in. We had the photo. We had been in places that journalists don't usually get to. We're in the emergency room. So at the point when I was recording this scene, I had actually kind of snuck into the emergency room. So this will be, if you guys have an ethics panel, like maybe this will come up because it's shady. So at that point, I had a relationship with Cash Alvaro. I'd visited him a number of times. His girlfriend had told me he was at the ER. I walked into the ER, and the ER late at night, ladies and gentlemen, is a horror show. There's people like limping around, crying in pain, drunks, you name it. And I walk up and I say, "Hi, I'm here to see Cash Alvaro." And she gives me a visitor sticker and sticks it on me, and I walked right through the doors. Now, if she had said, "Are you a journalist?" I would have said yes, because that is the proper and ethical thing to do. And bells and lights would have gone off, and they would have brought someone down from public affairs, and I would have never gotten through the doors. But they didn't, and so I walked in to visit him as a visitor, which is what I was doing, and sat down with him there and spent a couple hours with him. And I got this scene. Now, what's funny is that later, Michael showed up, because I texted him. I'm like, "Hey, I'm with Cash at the hospital. You should try and come down." And Michael walks in with all his big cameras on. And he walks right up and says, "Hey, I'm from the newspaper. I'm here to see a guy who's back in the emergency room." And they said, "We don't think so. You can't go back there." And he said, "Oh, no, it's okay. The reporter's already back there." At which point, very large security guards came and physically removed me from the room, put us in a back room, and yelled at us for a long time. And they were getting ready to call the cops. And poor Michael, who, remember, is just like a couple months out of school, is about, like, very scared. And I was like, "Well, what are they really going to do? You know, they're not going to arrest us. They're just going to chew us out." And he's like, "Oh, my God, we're going to get in real trouble. Are we going to get fired? What's going to happen?" And I noticed I don't generally think very fast, which is why I'm an investigative reporter, not a daily reporter. It takes a while. But I see that the meanest, biggest security guard has a little pin on. And it's a pin of a helicopter. And it's a pin of a Vietnam-era helicopter, a Bell Huey. And I said, "Sir," this is while he's yelling at me. I was like, "Sir, I see that you probably served in Vietnam." He said, "Yes, I did." And I asked him where he served, and we talked about it. And I said, "Well, let me tell you what we're doing here today." And I told him the whole story. And he let us go. So it was great. So where are we going from here? So what's the prompt for this one? It's Joanna. Joanna's going to take over now.
I'm gonna talk a little bit about the editing process, and then I want to leave plenty of time for Dave and Michael, and for Michael to be able to show some more of his photographs. And Dave talked about choking up in the writing process, and I want you to know that there were more times than I can count in editing his work and seeing Michael's photos that I choked up too. So anyone, pardon me, educators, but if you've done this, educators aside, if anyone tells you that going into journalism means you check your passions and your humanity at the door, they're wrong. The best journalists I know are insanely humane and human and passionate people about the communities in which they live. And we learn how to apply that in an appropriate way to do journalism. So that's my little plug about being a human being. And if any of you are learning that you check that at the door, your instructors are wrong. However, there are the ethical considerations that Dave and Michael talked about. We do not check our ethics at the door. I'll tell one small follow-on story that sort of illustrates the role of being an editor in this process. And those of you who are editors at your papers or your yearbooks, you know that many of you are behind the scenes. Your byline isn't on anything. You're not talking to the sources. You're not out shooting the photographs. My role really was to support them as much as possible all the time, give them time and encouragement and criticism, and to bring together a team even bigger than our team to support this work. And that included copy editors and page designers. In fact, there's some of them are right now. The person in the checked shirt with his back to us developed the website that you saw. The person with their arms folded in back is our presentation director who runs our copy desk. The gal you see standing with her legs apart is the one who designed those pages and took the work that Dave and Michael did and so lovingly turned it into 13 pages. I don't remember how many pages. And there's Dave, and the photo director, he's sitting on the table with his back to us. But I want to tell this one story about ethics, how we don't check our ethics at the door. So Dave and Michael and I are sitting around talking about this story at one point. I made a practice of trying to talk to them at least once a day about it. Usually my line to Michael was, "Do you have anything to show me? Have you shot anything lately? Can I see what you have?" And Dave, it would be a draft or some version of that. And one of them, I don't remember which, said, "Well, we're headed out to go take Cash to a doctor's appointment." Is that right? Do I have that? Am I remembering that? We're going to Cash needs a ride to the doctor, so we're going to go take him to the doctor. And I said, "Whoa, hold on a minute. You are not driving Cash Alvaro to the doctor. You then have inserted yourself into the story. If there's an outcome to that or something happens, you have become the story." Which launched then a very heart-rending and difficult discussion about, well, what if Cash has a heart attack or a seizure in front of us? What do we do then? And to which I said,
Well, it was a long discussion, and it was finally like, okay, what if the guy collapses? Because it'd been like, no, you can't do that, you can't do that,
you can't take him to the doctor, you can't pay for his medication, you can't buy him food, you can't take him to the grocery store.
Remember, while we're doing this in-depth thing that we're now getting congratulated for, this guy is homeless, hungry,
jobless,
having seizures, without medication,
no job.
Yeah, so it's a real discussion you have to have, because it's an inhumane thing to be like, "Hey, look, sorry, man, but I'm doing my job here. Yeah, I could give you a ride to the grocery store, but I'm not going to because of, ethics."
So we have this discussion about what
that
if this,
ends
what if
with
this.
If he drops dead, almost, you can perform CPR essentially.
Which did happen. This photo, in fact, shows that's Dave and another person in that photo. Dave and Michael were with him at some point, and he did in fact collapse, and they did in fact render aid. So I bring that up because it's a nice discussion about ethics, but about the humanity that the best journalists I know have. Just one more thing I wanted to say about editing. Those of you who think editing is a form of punishment or that you've done something wrong, that is not true. the process of rewriting gets you from here to here. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong or that you messed up or geez, how did I not turn that in? I can't tell you how many drafts Dave did. I don't know, 100?
A lot of red ink.
A lot. And I hope all of you at some point in your careers have a relationship with an editor where your editor loves your work as much as you do, and the goal is to get it better, not to point out what you did wrong, or that's never what I do. It's not that you did it
wrong.
That
is sometimes what you do.
Okay.
But I appreciate it because ultimately, it makes everything better.
Yeah. So I wanted to give that one note about editing because that was really my role. I wasn't on the front lines. I didn't meet Cash. Never have met Cash. I did meet one of the other subjects one time. I didn't meet Paul Sassy, the third man who was profiled. And I actually wanted it that way. I did not want to have the same emotional attachment to the sources that Dave and Michael did too. I thought it was very important that as an editor I have some distance and arm's length between all of us. So Michael, Dave, that's my plug about editing. Want to talk more about photos?
I think we should open up for questions.
Yeah, what's our time now? Anyone want to go that on? We don't want to go too long because we want... Okay, how long have we run so far? We could, but we could talk more.
Let's have Michael show a few... You want
Yeah,
to backtrack to a few photos?
We can talk about, something I didn't bring up earlier was being with these guys and being with Cash. This is a picture, a larger picture of something from that day. I think that a lot of what I thought in journalism school, a lot of what I maybe not was taught, but the way that I went about things was you were the journalist, they were the subject. There was a very clear line, and you kind of made that line stick, and you made it clear to them. And I agree that is how we made it happen. But in doing a story like this, we came to be such more of a part of their lives. This was the second time I had ever hung out with Cash. And just by being there for this whole thing and fighting to go with him and fighting to tell his story, I think that I really showed to him that he was worth something to me, that he was worth something to us, and that we weren't there just to take his picture and then leave and then go away and put it in the paper, the end of story. It was much more of a relationship between us. And by being there and by caring and by, fighting every step of the way to follow him, to sit with him in the ambulance while he went, to go into the ER, he had no one there for several hours. But I was there. And I think by showing him that he was that important to me, that he meant that much to me, really meant something to him. And it really allowed us the access to go back into his home and watch him, take his pills, to, follow him into the grocery store or the convenience store as he bought groceries. It went lengths. So I got a question the other day about how do you go out on an assignment like this and spend seven months with these guys and not be friends with them? And I don't think that's the case. I wouldn't call myself a friend with Cash, but you have to cultivate that friendly relationship and let them know that professional divide that you guys have being a journalist and them being a subject. But that doesn't mean that you're not a human. It doesn't mean that you don't care about them. It just means that you can't drive them to the doctor. It means you can't buy them medicine like you would, if this was my brother, yeah, I would, go to the ends of the earth to get him the care he needed. But our best tool is the story. And if we can tell a good story, it's had such an impact on all of these guys. And by us being able to tell that story and to insert ourselves into their lives, it's not the quick fix like going to the drugstore and putting $20 on the counter and getting some pain meds, but by doing this, we really had a better outcome in the end.
Hey, can I talk about where the idea comes from? Because that's a question I always get, so I'll just assume that someone out there is going to ask it. So, and it also is great because it shows how messy this stuff is. Because when you see it all presented, it looks great. We look really smart. At the beginning, it's sort of humbling how stupid you are. So let me show you how this one started. I'm sitting, probably avoiding doing something at work when someone that I know calls. And he's someone who helps out soldiers who've gotten in trouble at Fort Carson. And he calls me up and he says, you got to go down to the jail because there's a Fort Carson soldier down there who had been in the psychiatric hospital, but his commanders pulled him out of it and put him in the jail, and now they're going to court-martial him. And I said, well, that's interesting, you know. And I went down and I talked to this guy and heard his story. So in the jail over the little table, he tells me that he was in Iraq, and he came back from Iraq with a little bit of PTSD, and then he went to Afghanistan, and his PTSD got a little worse over there, and he couldn't sleep, he was having trouble focusing, and he went to the docs there in Afghanistan for help, and they gave him sort of the minimal dose of drugs they could without being forced to send him home, and said, you know what, go back to work, you'll be fine. Well, a couple days later, he pulled a machine gun on his squad mates, and obviously he wasn't fine anymore. So they send him back to the psychiatrist, who says, Jesus, this guy has had sort of like an acute event. We need to hospitalize him. Okay, he's bad. He's obviously not fit to be here. We're going to send him back to Fort Carson, you know, get him some treatment. Well, his commanders say, excuse me, this guy just pointed a gun at the other soldiers. We're not going to hospitalize him. We're going to prosecute him. And so I thought, well, this is a really interesting issue. Where does a wound of war become misconduct? And how do you draw the line? Right? Like, maybe this guy does need to be punished. Maybe he does need psychiatric help. And how do you decide? That's an interesting story. So I went back thinking how smart I am that I knew what the story was, and I told Joanna all about it. And then I was going to go back and interview him again, maybe about a week later. Because as I mentioned, I'm a slow worker and I procrastinated a lot. So like, by the time I got back to the jail, he wasn't there anymore. And I was like, what happened? And someone, after asking that question to a number of people, I found out that the Army had come to him and given him a piece of paper and said, son, sign this. If you sign it, we won't court-martial you and you won't be sent to prison. Instead, you'll just agree to quit the Army and you can go on your way. And he said, great. And he signed it, and he walked out. Well, that piece of paper also says, by the way, you'll never get you waive any VA benefits or any other type of benefits by signing this, which wasn't explained to him. And he was just gone. I still have never seen him again. And I was like, wait a minute. There were two really good questions here. Either this guy is a dangerous criminal, or he's dangerously injured. And the Army has decided to answer neither of those questions. I wonder how much that happens. And so I went to the Army, which, like any bureaucracy, keeps reams of data. And they could show me exactly how many people each year were signing this piece of paper. And it was going up and up and up and up. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of guys who they're making a decision not to make a decision at all. Let's see if we can find some of those guys. And so that's the process that started, where we found this guy like Cash Alvaro. And would you click to Gerald Jensen? This guy is amazing. If you read one part of the story, read this guy's backstory, because this is a picture from his second tour. He's standing on the rim of the Korangal, which is like the nastiest part of Afghanistan. And that's after he got blown up in Iraq, had his face reconstructed, and volunteered to go back. It was later that he was kicked out for minor misconduct, or excuse me, almost kicked out. And then finally do we have Paul in there? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want, Paul Sassy, who was blown up multiple times in Iraq, and we met him. Will you go back to the one in solitary confinement? When he had been put in solitary confinement and had been sitting there without charge for months without charge, which is like not okay in any way whatsoever. But he was just sitting there because the Army didn't know what to do with him. They really wanted to prosecute him, and they knew that he was too, like, you know, to use a crass term, crazy to do it. You know, that the prosecution wouldn't stick, and they didn't know how to deal with it. So they were just going to let him sit there until they figured it out. And so, you know, by telling these guys stories, all of their lives changed. He got out of jail. All his charges got dropped. Cash got a home. Cash got food. Cash got good medical care. And like I said, like, it took months of me sort of, I describe it as like walking around in a dark room where at first I think the story is one thing. And then I realized, oh, there's this piece of paper called a Chapter 10. And I have to spend like a week figuring out what a Chapter 10 is because I don't know anything about Army regulations. And so like I feel that thing in the dark room and I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should find out how often this happens. And that takes me a while. Like, who do I ask? You know, what's their phone number? You know, all this like dumb stuff where I'm just like fumbling. You know, and it takes a long time to take all those pieces and like build them together and be like, so you see, here's what we actually have in this dark room. And that's what the process is, but it's not as pretty as we make it look at the end. So if in your process you're like, I am bad at this, that is not the case. It is just that the process behind the finished product is ugly and clumsy and frustrating, and you just have to keep doing it, and it gets easier.
Dave touched on my two favorite magic journalism words. I wonder why this is happening. I wonder if the Army knows. I wonder if the Army is doing it intentionally. I wonder if the Army is doing it unintentionally. I wonder how Gerald Jensen brushes his teeth. I wonder how he gets along with his wife. I mean, you see that question reflected throughout the reporting and the photography of this and even the editing. I wonder how many of these soldiers there are in our community. I wonder how many there are in the United States. I wonder where they are. I wonder who's helping them. I wonder what our lawmakers have to say about it. And that shaped the entire work, I would say. I wonder what Michael's doing today. Has he been out shooting anything? Let me go ask him. I wonder if Dave has a new draft for me to mark up.
And now we're wondering what you're wondering.
Oh, yeah, what a nice segue.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
Wow, that was really professional.
You're welcome. We'd love to open it up to questions.
Yeah, this is a huge room, no pressure.
And first, let's give a round of applause to the panel. So the way this will work, I have a couple questions from Twitter that I'll ask, but I'll also be walking around the audience. So if you can just keep your hand raised, please stay patient. I will try to get to as many questions as possible. I apologize if I don't get to yours. But first, a question from Twitter. This comes from Natasha Brennan. And she asks, while digging into the Army's wrongdoings, was there ever a point anyone was threatened, felt in danger, or pressures from the Army, DOD, or others?
Oh my God, this is a great question.
Is that a plant?
Yeah, is that a plant? So, do you want to tell it? Or okay, I love telling this story. So the good news is I'm going to tell a story about the Army, and I've run up against the Army repeatedly because like any big institution, they don't like anything questioned, and they will try to stamp it out. The good news is this is the largest, most powerful military in the world, and I am not a fine mist. And they could have easily turned me into a fine mist, and so we have a great, strong democracy. But along the way, there's a lot of silly, high school stuff that happens. And when they figured out more or less what I was doing, the first thing they did is they called the editor. And they're like, this guy is biased, and he's just digging up stuff that's not wrong, and he's sticking up stuff that's not true, and you need to take him off this. And the editor, who at the time was not Joanna, but another gentleman, to his credit, said, no. And so they called the publisher. And they said, this guy is biased, and you need to get him off of this. And the publisher said, maybe. But then he talked to the editor, and then he called back and said, no. So then they called the owner of the whole newspaper chain. And they're like, this guy is biased. You've got to get rid of him. And he said, you're right. And then his publisher said, well, maybe not. That's not necessarily a good idea. And the editor said, you're crazy. And we had this big sit down where I had to show them all of my data, essentially, that said, I am neither biased nor wrong. Here you go. And then they were on board. So the Army had to try a new tactic, which is great, and I wish I had recorded it, or I wish they'd emailed it. They had this lieutenant colonel call up And I'm just sitting at work, like slumped in my chair, like
Procrastinating.
I was going to say probably, like thinking about something that I should be doing but wasn't. And this lieutenant colonel calls up and he says, "Mr. Phillips, we know who you've been talking to." And at this point, I knew that they knew nothing. I was like, "Who have I been talking to?" And he said, we know, you know. And I said, "Well, just tell me." And he said, "You better be more careful. You need to be careful because we know what you're doing." And I said, "If you know what I'm doing, why don't you let me talk to the people that I've asked you to set up interviews with?" And he said, "Don't change the subject. We know who you're talking to and you need to stop." And so I was just like, "This is ridiculous. You need to stop." I hung up. We never talked again. They gave up. But they pushed hard. They didn't want, each little cog there was worried about wherever they were in the middle of this huge institution. Their main concern was they needed to protect their ability to make the next small step up in this institution. And I wasn't going to cause just problems. So if they could kill it, that's good, And, unfortunately for them, good for probably the Army as a whole, they didn't kill it.
Hi. I'm Kayla from McClintock High School in Arizona. And when you guys met resistance with this story, because I know you've met a lot of it, was there ever a point where you thought that you should drop the story because of the resistance, or how did you work around it or get through that?
No, the resistance made us want it more.
My strategy was to...
When someone resists you that much, you know you're onto something. Otherwise, why would they care? Why would they even bother with a newspaper in Colorado Springs and 3 people working on a project? That's a good indicator to you when someone's protesting. Go ahead.
I had to, when the resistance came and it pressed down on the people above me in our organization, I had to stomp up and down and swear and tell them that they were being unethical and threaten to quit. And they didn't fire me, so that's good. But it was real. There were real discussions. This was the biggest thing the paper had ever done. It was difficult. It was very controversial in a conservative town that is, its biggest part of its economy is the military. And we had a new owner, and it was for real. And there were arguments, and it got very tense. But ultimately now, we all get along.
Here's another question from Twitter. This comes from Devin Groff. He asks, and this is sort of just related to broadly journalism, what is one skill that you believe young journalists lack, and how do you believe schools should address that issue?
I would say patience and fundamentals. I think it's great to have wonderful goals and aspirations, but it took me 25 years to get here, and I didn't start out writing or working on work of this magnitude. And I, to use a bad baseball analogy, I try to hit a bunch of singles and doubles and just get a lot of work under your belt, a lot of bylines, a lot of talking to sources, a lot of so when I say lacking patience, be patient with yourself and with the process, and just do a lot of work. Read a lot, write a lot, report a lot, talk to a lot of people, and practice a lot.
Hello, my name is Kristan Santos, and I'm from Enochs High School in Modesto, California. First, I'd just like to commend you for the story, because honestly, I find it more angering than depressing. So I was just curious, what legislation or changes in protocol or policy resulted either in the VA or the Army?
A lot of it is pretty technical, and it all deals with how, when they decide someone is going to be kicked out, they will evaluate them. The biggest law change that happened is now, if you decide you want to kick someone out or you want to give them this piece of paper that has them quit, they have to get a full medical examination first, and if it shows that in fact they have PTSD or TBI, they can go into another exit from the Army where they get full benefits. So that's the one that makes the biggest difference.
Here's another question from Twitter, and you guys touched on this a little bit, but Patrick Briddy wants you to delve a little bit more into where do you draw the line between being objective and trying to bring about change?
This one's me. Okay, Joanna.
Well, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Uh-oh.
And then I'll tweak it a little.
I think that we realize that our power comes from our observation, and as soon as you step in and even flavor it a little with anything that appears to be advocacy, it only dilutes things. And so, did I absolutely feel that these guys that I was covering were getting a raw deal? Yeah. Like, did I hope that the government would treat them as, I think generally as a society we thought was right? Yes. But all I needed to do is, I didn't need to advocate. All I needed to do is say, here is what's happening, period.
And I want to add to that, in no way did any of us sometimes say, the Army is bad, we are out to get the Army. That was never any thought that we had. And in fact, the Army has a side of this story too, about dealing with budget cuts and wars being over and caring for, and just the massive infrastructure that is the Army and the VA. And we never thought of this as trying to advocate for any kind of position or any kind of outcome. We wanted to lay out the facts and tell the stories and be as fair to the Army as we were to these three soldiers in telling the story, because ultimately readers and the public decided. We didn't state a position. We didn't have to. The story told itself. But I want to make really clear that we didn't sit around and say, let's go get the Army. That was never what we were about.
Hi, my name is Sloan Samberson. I'm from Coppell, Texas. My question is, when did you, how did you get in contact with Cash?
So this is a great thing to remember whether you write about the Army or anything else. There's always going to be people who are really connected to different subgroups. And you don't have to know the subgroup, you just have to know the connected guy. So in our case, there are people in the community that try to help troubled soldiers and veterans. You know, they might be at the homeless shelter, they might be at the legal aid clinic, but they come in contact with these folks and they know the issues. So when I decided that I thought I knew what the issue was, I started looking around to a handful of these folks and saying, you know, who do you have that's affected by this? And that's how I got in touch with these guys.
And I'm just going to jump on that and say that this is something I really wish I had known in school when I was going through, when my professors would say, you need to go out and shoot a photo essay, or you need to go do an issue story, which was very fresh in my mind when I started working on this story. When I learned this lesson, I went, oh my God, I cannot believe I didn't know this in college. And that's just, you know, so if you want to really impress your professors when you go to college and you start studying this and you start working on this, find the people who are helping the people you want to do a story on. Don't go looking for the homeless guy on the street. Go looking for the guy who's helping the guy on the street. And he's going to get you in contact with the most impressive stories and the most touching ones too.
Yeah, because you might spend a day trying to do that story. He's been on the street doing that story for years, and he knows how you really need to winnow it down.
Great. Here's another question from Twitter. This comes from Brianna Bradley. Can a photo ever be too personal to share?
I think that a photo can absolutely be too personal to share, but I try never to get myself in that position. I really, on a story like this, I really let...
Go to the bed.
Do I have that in here?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'm gonna try and find a picture here.
Or like him fighting with his wife, maybe.
Let's go all the way back. Okay, here we go. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. yes, there can be pictures that are too personal to share, but I try and let my subjects know what they're getting into and what I'm kind of going to put them through. This is a very personal situation, and I told Gerald Jensen, who's the guy on the left, the veteran, sleeping there with his wife, that I really wanted to kind of capture their more intimate moments. I wanted to be there throughout the night. I didn't want to leave when dinner was finished and the dishes were done, which is what I had been doing. And so I had a real conversation with him. I told him that I wanted to stay, and he was fine with it. I had been with him a lot, and he knew that I was not going to misrepresent anything, or it wasn't going to be weird. This kind of goes back to me saying that we were very friendly with each other. We knew what we both wanted, and that we were both there telling the same story together. And so by building that relationship, I was able to stand in the corner of his bedroom for 30 minutes without it being too awkward and without it being too personal, and to share it. I think that's how the best photographers get those pictures, and the personal pictures are the best pictures. Go look at any of the awards that just came out this year, National Press Photographers Association or World Press Photo. You see those touching, intimate moments, and those aren't pictures that come from a guy walking into a room and saying, hey, you two are two gay men in Russia, let me take your photo because this is going to be really cool and I'm going to win an award from it. It comes from you saying, this is a really important story to me, and building that trust and building that relationship. And by the time you take that picture and put it in the paper, you're both very proud that it's made it in there because you've built this relationship and you've built something that means something beyond just what the picture is. So I think that's the end of my answer.
I'm Savannah from Manhattan, Kansas. What was the conversation between the subjects and you, while you were following them, and how do you keep it professional but also personable?
I love to joke as much as I can when I'm out on an assignment, as long as it's not a super serious situation. Even if it is, actually. I mean, we've had floods and fires come through Colorado Springs, and, being lighthearted, being kind of that, something that they can take a little bit of the stress off of their life, really, I think, goes a long way. And so I tried to do that as much as possible. I feel like, I don't think that telling a joke is breaching any kind of bias or anything like that. And I think that it really goes a long way. It shows that you're human, that you're not just there to take their story and leave. You're there to be a part of that story and to cultivate that relationship.
I really rely on having a good relationship with photographers who are really good at making small talk. It's great. If you can have that happen, it's fantastic, because you're going to do your interview and you're going to identify the important themes, but then just for whatever reason, photographers are really good at banter, and they're going to banter with them, and then something great's going to come out that you would have never thought to ask. And a lot of times, at least with Michael, and this is probably true with this room too, is everybody likes Michael more than me. They love Michael, and so it's great. So Michael shows up, everybody likes him, I just stand there, I get great notes, everybody wins. So that's really important. Find a great photographer and hold on to them.
Here's another question from Twitter. When and how did you decide on the shape of the story in print and on the web?
I'll tackle the web part, at least that part of the question. How many of you are familiar with the New York Times piece called Snowfall? Remember when that came out and we all went, oh my, what is that? And
and now it's so 2012.
It is. Although we pretty quickly started to pick it apart, but as we do. When Dave and Michael and I were talking about this story in late 2012, I was thinking, we have to do something that cool or cooler. And we had Chris Hickerson, who you saw in the plaid shirt, came in for a job interview, and I said, do you know that snowfall thing? And he said, yeah. I said, do you know how to do that? Because we have this thing we're working on, and I can't tell you about what it is because you don't work here yet, but could you do that? And what would it look like? What would it be like? So the web part we were thinking about from the very beginning, because I and we wanted to do something that would knock your socks off. And the print part, not quite that early, but we knew that Michael had incredible stuff. And so I began the process of kind of sweet talking the editor about, we have really good stuff and we're going to need a lot of space. And how much space? A lot of space. Really, it's going to be worth it, though. So that was part of the relationship building that I was trying to do behind the scenes to get a lot of buy-in for this.
For me, it's just easy if you have a one-person narrative to get people to read it. And so that's why I chose 3 days, 3 guys, because there were sort of what I thought were 3 aspects of the issue. And, were there 3 guys that showed it? I saw who they were. It's like, okay, I'm going to tell you the story of this guy. And you're going to care about the guy by the time you're a couple graphs in, and so you're going to keep reading. If I just tried to make it like an issue story, and I'm like, here's 5 guys, you'd be like, never mind.
This is actually sort of a follow-up question on Twitter. What advice do you have about pursuing a story in depth versus keeping it really tight?
Boy, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I read a lot of long stories. Okay, so we knew this was a big story, though. I mean, I've written a lot of 500-word stories. We knew this is a big story because it got to something that was central and controversial to a decade of national discussion.
In a community where these issues are...
Yeah, in a community where it was central to our whole economy. And we had the data to show that it was going on all over. It had never been reported, and it was affecting people in horrific ways, and then dumping the problem onto civil society. That's about as big as it gets. If you're ever going to spend, how many words was it? I don't know, let's say 5,000. If you're going to spend 5,000 words, that is the time. But it's important to know that all the tools that we used are the tools that you guys have right now. We used YouTube, and most of our traffic came through Facebook. We're a small paper with a small budget. The tools that we used were mostly just storytelling, which is free, and online, largely free online tools.
But I think a very concise way to say that would be follow your story. If you know that if the reporting takes you somewhere and you've got something big, fight for the space. I'm a photographer. I don't know anything about fighting for space, but I knew when I heard about this story that it was going to be big and long. And I think that as a journalist, it's your duty to know what you have and to follow the story. And if that means you write 5,000 words, that means you write 5,000 words. If it means you write 300, you write 300.
And it's okay to think that you have a big story and you report and it doesn't pan out, and to go back and say, this didn't really work out, and it's really, move on. It's okay. It doesn't mean you did it wrong. It didn't go the way you thought it was going to go.
My name is Ebony Gonzalez, and I was just, and I'm from, I'm at Alonzo Stagg High School, and I was wondering, how do you determine whether a source is reliable?
So these guys had a lot of reason to lie to us, the guys that we featured, and there was a lot at stake, and so I couldn't take their word for it, and so anything that happened, I needed a recording or an official document. The big source for us was their Army medical records. I think that there's a sort of a spectrum. If you're doing the story about the water skiing squirrel that comes to town, and I actually did that story, and you talk to someone there who's like, oh, he's really cute. You don't need to check that source. But if you're going up against the government, questioning its policy, it better be bulletproof because they're going to come after you. So you'll learn. But that's a question that on every story you ask yourself.
Here's another question from Twitter. It says, is the state of American journalism in 2015 capable of truly informing citizens about the true costs of war?
I can't answer that question.
I don't know if that's an trying to implicate journalism or the American public, or I'm not quite sure where that question goes to, but yes, I do think journalism is capable. I'm not going to put a plug in for journalism every time. Yes.
I think it's a great question. I just don't think we can answer it. Talk amongst yourselves.
Hi, I'm Kylie Charney-Harrington from Lacey, Washington. And my question is more like practical. But so I really like the idea of being able to write stories that take a long time and you just follow them where they go, but that seems pretty hard to implement in the high school newsroom. So how are you able to balance that with your daily workload and your more like kind of like basic story needs?
Well, let me first of all say that none of us did this in 40 hours a week, and that didn't happen. And we all worked nights and weekends and early mornings and weekends and weekends and weekends on this because we thought it was really important. So if you have a story you want to go after it, and don't think that it won't consume you.
You know, and too, like, it was never the thing where, like, I felt like I had a choice. Like, I've had a couple big stories like this where it was, like, too important. Like, I didn't know how I was going to do it. All the big stories I've done in my life were after I started having, my wife and I had kids. So, like, I was juggling a bunch of stuff. And, like, it just hadn't happened. You know, like, what are you going to do? Be like, hey, look, sorry, Cash, I'm really busy. I can't write this story. So, like, I'm sure things will work out for you. See you later.
But I think the other important thing is you can't just tell yourself that you like the idea of long-form storytelling. I mean, that's fantastic, but it takes more passion than that. You got to find something that you've got to find that story that you really, really love. That's, I think, what we all did with this story. It was something that really meant a lot to us, and so we were willing to go above and beyond and sacrifice weekends and sacrifice everything to tell this story. And that was because we loved the story. Not maybe loved the story, but we needed to tell the story. And so if you can find something you're really passionate about, you'll find the time. And I think that's what's important.
And sometimes these stories find you. I mean, like kind of like Dave said, how are you going to say no when you get started? And I mean, how am I going to say no to, hey, Joanna, I was with Gerald Jensen today. You want to come look at these pictures? I'm not going to say no. Or Dave says, I have a new draft. Do you want to take it home? Yeah. You can't say no.
But one maybe practical piece of advice for you is find someone who's as enthusiastic as you are. I know that Dave and I would bounce. I would literally go over to Dave every single day and talk about what was new with Cash or what was new with Gerald Jensen or what was new with the Army, because I love bouncing ideas off of him, and it would inspire me and it would really push me to do better. And so by me having Dave there, it really pushed me to want to do more things. So find someone who inspires you, find someone who you sit down and talk about journalism with and geek out for hours and talk about all the stories you want to do, and then find that story and go do it.
My name's Brandy from SmokeyNow.com and Smoky Hill High School in Colorado. And I was wondering if, maybe not this story, if you've ever had a subject decide that they don't want to be in your story anymore and how you deal with it.
Should we talk about, do you have something other than honorable? No, what do you have?
Oh yeah, tell that story.
Vincent Gabriel, that's right. Vincent Gabriel. This is actually very recent.
The answer is yes. We've had that happen.
So this was just as Dave was leaving the Gazette. He found a story about this veteran who was, the details are really kind of iffy, but basically he was pulled over by police for basically nothing. So he says. He was pulled over for police for basically nothing, beaten, taken to jail, and now he had all these charges against him. And we really wanted to tell his story, tell the story of him going through this process of going through court and all of that.
And he wanted us to.
And
he approached us.
And at the beginning, he wanted us to. And so at this point, Dave had left, but we took this story in stride and we really started pushing for it. And things just started getting weird. He he wouldn't let us over to, he wouldn't tell us if he was married or not. He wouldn't tell us if he had 3 kids and he was going to jail for 30 days, and he wouldn't tell us who was taking care of his kids. He, what were all the other
Well, it
weird
kind of
things?
goes to the other question about your trust in sources, and we just started to feel like there was something else going on here, and
He said he had TBI and PTSD, but he wouldn't tell us about his military service. He wouldn't tell us where he served, what he did. He wouldn't give us any of his friends. He said he wasn't in touch with them anymore. It was just all these things started falling apart.
and then he didn't want us talking to him anymore.
So we had spent about, what, 4 months?
Yeah, months.
Putting our work into this, and I had great pictures, we had great reporting, and he came in one day and said he didn't want to be in it, and we talked him through it, and we talked him back into the story, and then another month went by, and he came back in and said, take me out, I'm going to sue if you use my name, if all of this, and so we had a conversation, and it's kind of all on the shop room floor right now. We're trying to pick back up the story to tell what we kind of figured out the story to be with other veterans, but he really backed out on that.
Great. My apologies to those of you with your hands raised. This is going to be our last question for tonight.
Hi, I'm Alina from Monte Vista in Cupertino, California. Okay. How did you decide your story was done and that you didn't need more sources to interview or more time to spend with them?
That's really hard. I think to read this now, I still don't think it's done. I would do things differently or edit it differently. But at some point, we had to set a time for it to run and be done. And I guess we got to the point where Michael felt like he had enough photos, and David done all the reporting that we thought was going to be enough, and we set a run date, and that's when we decided it would run. But that's a hard question, because I many times don't feel like the story's ever done. There's always, what if we did this one more phone call, or could you rewrite that paragraph one more time? It's not quite right, or I don't like the ending. How can we work this back into the ending? It never feels done.
See, and I was the one who was arguing with him, like, when are you going to run this? It's done. It's been done. Run the story. Because I felt an urgency to, do something. Like, I was outraged that this was going on. And so, I was squared away. Did I do a lot of work to, double check it? Yeah, but did I have all the big pieces there? Absolutely. Could I have spent another 2 months gathering beautiful anecdotes? Sure. But, that phase was over. It just needed to go in the paper.
All right. One more round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.